Argonne Forest, France, October 1918. 554 American soldiers vanished into the Argonne Forest's fog. Only 197 returned, but the military records show 198 survivors. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale that will make you question if some battlefields never truly release their dead. October 2nd, 1918. The Western Front had become a maze of trenches, barbed wire, and broken dreams. Major Charles Whittlesey of the 77th Division studied his orders with growing concern in the pre-dawn darkness. His battalion's mission seemed straightforward: advance through the Argonne Forest and take the German position. But something about the morning felt wrong. The fog rolled in unnaturally thick, seeming to pulse with each artillery flash on the horizon. Lieutenant James Richardson noticed it first, the way it moved against the wind, how it appeared to reach out with tendrils that coiled around their boots. The men of the 308th Infantry Regiment shifted uneasily as visibility dropped to mere feet. Radio contact with flanking units crackled and died. Compass needles began to spin wildly. Still, Major Whittlesey's orders were clear. They had to press forward. The battalion advanced into the wall of white, their footsteps oddly muffled by the strange mist. Private Cooper, a farm boy from Kansas, was the first to notice the silence. No birds, no insects, not even the usual chorus of distant shell fire. Just the sound of labored breathing and the soft squelch of boots in mud. 554 men marched into that fog. Each carried standard equipment: rifle, ammunition, 5 days' rations, and their own private fears. None of them noticed how the mist seemed to thicken behind them, cutting off their retreat. None of them saw the shadows that flitted between the trees, always just at the edge of vision. None of them realized that with each step forward, they were marching deeper into something that defied explanation. By noon, they should have reached their objective. The map showed clear terrain, but the fog persisted and the forest seemed to change around them. Trees appeared where none should be. Paths twisted back on themselves. The few landmarks they could see through the mist didn't match their maps. Major Whittlesey checked and rechecked their position, growing more troubled with each calculation. Lieutenant Richardson made a note in his journal, his usually steady hand shaking slightly. Something is wrong with this place. The fog. It's not natural. Men keep reporting voices, figures in the mist. I tell them it's battle fatigue, but I've seen them too. And the worst part? They're wearing our uniforms, our faces. As evening approached, the battalion found themselves in a ravine that wasn't marked on any map. The fog grew denser, and the first German bullets began to whistle through the white void. But these weren't normal combat sounds. The gunfire seemed to come from all directions at once, and the German voices they heard calling out were speaking perfect English. Major Whittlesey gave the order to dig in. 554 men began to fortify their position, not knowing they were digging their own graves, not knowing that the Argonne Forest had chosen them for something far worse than war. Night fell like a smothering blanket. Sergeant Miller, scanning the perimeter with his field glasses, logged the first inexplicable event in his official report. German soldiers approached their position walking upright, ignoring cover, moving with an unnatural rigidity. When hit by American fire, they didn't fall. Instead, they simply faded back into the mist.
leaving no bodies. The radio crackled to life at midnight. Through waves of static, fragments of messages leaked through. Trap. Not alone. Wrong coordinates. Major Whittlesey hunched over the device, straining to understand. The voice speaking was his own, warning of events that wouldn't happen for another day. Private Cooper established the first rule: don't answer the voices. They started as whispers, familiar voices calling for help from the fog. 3 men from Baker Company disappeared, responding to what they thought was their sergeant's call. Their screams echoed for hours, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Lieutenant Richardson documented the second rule in his journal, ink smearing from his trembling hands. Never look too long at your fellow soldiers. Men began noticing subtle wrongness in their companions, eyes that reflected light like mirrors, shadows that moved against the light, smiles that stretched too wide. Private Mitchell swore his bunkmate hadn't blinked in 3 hours. Excerpt from German intelligence report, October 3rd, 1918. American position located in Sector 4F appears simultaneously in Sector 7B. Scout reports indicate identical unit occupying multiple locations. Request immediate clarification. The third rule emerged from necessity. Keep track of the numbers. 554 men entered the fog. By the second night, head counts became an hourly ritual. The numbers never added up the same way twice. Sometimes they counted 560 men, sometimes 540. The extra soldiers couldn't tell they were extra. The missing ones would reappear hours later, with no memory of their absence. As supplies dwindled, Corporal Hayes noticed their rations were lasting longer than possible. The bread in their packs remained fresh despite the damp. Canteens refilled themselves when no one was watching. At first, this seemed like a blessing. Then Private Rodriguez cut into his bread and watched dark liquid seep out. No one ate after that. Major Whittlesey gathered his officers in a dugout that seemed to expand when too many people entered it. The map they studied shifted subtly every time they looked away. The major's voice remained steady as he outlined their situation. 6 companies surrounded, ammunition running low, and something in the fog that wasn't German, wasn't human, and seemed to be playing with them like a cat with mice. The night deepened, and with it came the certainty that the Argonne wasn't just a forest. It was something ancient and aware, and they had wandered into its maw. Dawn never came on October 4th. The darkness stretched beyond its natural limits, broken only by muzzle flashes that illuminated impossible scenes in the fog. Lieutenant Richardson watched through his binoculars as German soldiers advanced and retreated in perfect synchronization, like marionettes on strings. Behind their lines, something massive moved through the trees, its silhouette suggesting angles that hurt the eyes. Recovered German field recording, October 4th, 1918. They're everywhere and nowhere. We shell their position, direct hits confirmed, yet their return fire continues unabated. Schneider swears he killed the same American officer 3 times. Each time, the body vanished. Each time, the officer returned with a different face. The battalion's medic, Dr. Harrison, noticed the first physical changes. Wounds sustained in combat began healing wrong. Shrapnel wounds sealed themselves with what looked like tree bark. Bullet holes wept sap instead of blood. Private Cooper's eyes had changed color 3 times since morning, and the right one now reflected light like a cat's. Major Whittlesey ordered a defensive line formed, but the geometry betrayed them. Men, standing 3 feet apart, reported being unable to see each other. Others found themselves back to back, when they should have been on opposite sides of the perimeter. The trenches they dug transformed overnight, stretching into tunnels that led to places that couldn't exist. Extract from Sergeant Miller's field notes. 1500 hours. Executed counterattack against German position. 1505 hours. Reached enemy trenches. Found them empty. 1507 hours. Discovered our own boot prints in the mud. Somehow attacked our own position from an impossible angle. 1510 hours. Men report fighting mirror images of themselves. The forest's influence spread like an infection. Soldiers began speaking in languages they'd never learned, recounting memories of battles they couldn't have fought. Corporal Hayes conducted roll call and discovered 3 men answering to the same name, each believing himself to be the original. When questioned separately, each provided identical childhood memories. As their 4th day in the pocket began, the battalion's reality fractured further. Time flowed differently for each soldier. Lieutenant Palmer aged 3 years in an hour. Private Mitchell's watch ran backwards, its hands spinning against nature while he seemed to grow younger. Some men reported experiencing the same firefight dozens of times, each iteration ending differently. Dr. Harrison's medical log filled with impossible observations. Soldiers' dog tags rearranged their letters overnight. Men woke up with different faces, claiming they'd always looked that way. The wounds he treated seemed to migrate between patients. In one case, a bullet wound traveled up a private's arm over the course of an hour, leaving a trail of healing flesh before disappearing entirely. The Argonne's trap was more than physical. It was rewriting them, erasing the lines between what was real and what couldn't be. By October 5th, hunger began distorting their judgment. The remaining rations had transformed. Tinned beef bore fingerprints from the inside. Hardtack crumbled into crawling shapes. The water in their canteens tasted like memories. Childhood homes, first kisses, battlefield deaths that hadn't happened yet. Medical report. Dr. Harrison. Time unknown. Men experiencing shared hallucinations across impossible distances. 8 soldiers in different positions simultaneously reported seeing their mothers at their bedsides in Nebraska, Kansas, and New York. Telegraph confirmation. All mothers died at exactly that moment. Timestamp on deaths precedes their enlistment dates. Major Whittlesey found himself conducting the same staff meeting repeatedly. Each iteration revealed subtle changes, officers switching faces, maps showing different terrains, casualty reports listing soldiers who hadn't been born yet. During the 7th repetition, he noticed his reflection in his compass, speaking different words than he was. Lieutenant Richardson's journal entries became increasingly erratic. The forest is learning from us. It wears our dead like masks. Jenkins took a direct hit from artillery. Watched him die myself. An hour later, he walked out of the fog. Perfect copy, except his shadow falls toward the sun. When he speaks, other voices echo his words moments before he says them. The Germans attempted another assault at dusk. Through the fog, American soldiers watched in horror as their attackers' uniforms shifted between Wehrmacht gray and Union blue, their weapons cycling through 70 years of military evolution with each step. Some carried muskets from the Civil War. Others wielded weapons that hadn't been invented yet. Fragment of German intelligence debrief. Recovered, 1956. Prisoner interrogation reveals temporal anomalies. American soldier claimed to be from 77th Division, 1918. Uniform and equipment match description.
Subject's dog tags dated 1944. Dental records identify him as a Civil War casualty from 1863. Carbon dating of his boot leather, 1987. Sergeant Miller organized a patrol to probe German lines. 6 men left, 8 returned. The extra 2 were perfect duplicates of soldiers who had died 3 days earlier. They remembered dying, remembered the darkness that followed, remembered something vast and patient, watching them from the spaces between moments. When asked their names, they responded with geographical coordinates that didn't exist. Dr. Harrison's medical tent violated physics. Patients entered with minor wounds and emerged decades older. Others regressed to childhood before his eyes. One soldier's injury showed surgical stitches using techniques that hadn't been developed yet. The doctor's own reflection aged and rejuvenated randomly, its movements out of sync with his own. The Argonne's grip tightened. Time became fluid, memories unreliable. The only constant was the fog, and the growing certainty that it was watching them, learning them, becoming them. October 6th arrived 3 times that day. Each iteration brought worse revelations. Private Cooper spotted something through his rifle scope that made him gouge out his own eyes. But the eyes grew back, changed. They now tracked movement seconds before it happened. His screams came before his injuries. Intercepted German radio transmission. Date unclear. Something is moving between our lines, not the Americans. Bigger, older. Scout team reports ground displacement patterns matching infantry movement, but scaled up 1,000-fold. Forest floor shows footprints of impossible size, filled with specimens of plant life extinct for millions of years. Major Whittlesey made a devastating discovery in his tactical manual. Between standard infantry protocols, new pages had grown like tumors. They contained operations reports from wars that hadn't happened yet, tactical analyses of weapons that didn't exist, and battle strategies for engaging enemies that defied physics. The ink moved on its own, rewriting history and future simultaneously. Lieutenant Richardson found his own grave, then another, and another. Each headstone bore his name but listed different deaths, different wars, different centuries. He watched in horror as his corpse climbed out of each grave, wearing versions of his face from different timelines. They saluted, reported for duty, and their memories became his. I died at Gettysburg, leading a charge that never happened. I fell at Normandy, decades from now. I froze in Valley Forge, a century before my birth. I am dying right now, in a forest that remembers too much. Archaeological Survey, Argonne Forest, 1947. Layer analysis reveals anomalous stratification. World War I artifacts found beneath Napoleonic remains, above Vietnam-era equipment. Carbon dating inconsistent. Tree ring samples show impossible patterns, years that repeat, years that never occurred, growth rings forming in real time during examination. The forest floor began digesting their trenches. Men sank into mud that pulled memories from their minds and replaced them with other soldiers' deaths. Dr. Harrison treated men who were physically present, but mentally scattered across centuries of warfare. Some spoke with the voices of soldiers, yet to die in wars, yet to come. Sergeant Miller organized an ammunition count. Each bullet they fired appeared back in their magazines, aged decades. Grenades exploded with the sounds of future wars. Their rifles transformed in their hands, Flintlocks becoming muskets, becoming carbines, becoming weapons they couldn't name, each metamorphosis accompanied by phantom battles playing out in the fog. The Argonne wasn't just a forest anymore. It was a wound in time, bleeding soldiers from every war that ever was or would be. And something in that wound had noticed them, something that collected warriors, like specimens, preserving them in amber made of frozen moments. October 7th shattered like glass. Each fragment showed a different version of the battalion's desperate attempt to break out of the pocket. Major Whittlesey led the first charge at dawn, or what passed for dawn, in the perpetual fog. As they advanced, the forest revealed its collected horrors. Fragment of wire recording, recovered from German lines. They're charging in impossible formations. American infantry mixed with Roman legionnaires. Civil War soldiers moving in perfect synchronization with troops wearing uniforms we don't recognize. The forest is giving birth to armies from the dust. God help us all. The battlefield transformed with each step. Soldiers stumbled through pockets of different wars, ancient Persian arrows flying alongside German bullets. Private Cooper, his altered eyes bleeding mercury, screamed warnings seconds before each temporal shift. Men disappeared into moments of past battles, emerging with new scars and memories of deaths they hadn't died yet. Lieutenant Richardson documented the chaos in his journal, his handwriting changing with each sentence. The forest is a museum of war, and we're becoming its exhibits, watching our own skeletons rise from the ground wearing dog tags that haven't been issued yet. Time isn't just broken here, it's weaponized. The fog. It's not hiding the enemy. It is the enemy. Official report, 77th Division Command. Recovered, 1962. Aerial reconnaissance impossible. Photographs show battalion position occurring simultaneously in multiple locations, spanning several centuries of warfare. Ground team reports temporal displacement extending 3 kilometers from last known coordinates. Area appears to be experiencing multiple historical periods concurrently. Dr. Harrison's medical tent became a nexus of paradox. Wounds healed before they were inflicted. Men died of injuries they would receive in future battles. The doctor found himself treating the same soldiers across different versions of reality, each one carrying fragments of memory from lives they hadn't lived yet. Sergeant Miller's platoon reached the German lines only to find their own fortifications miraculously transported. The Germans they engaged were fighting phantoms, firing at reflections of battles long past and yet to come. The very air seemed to vibrate with the echoes of every shot fired in human history. The breakthrough attempt collapsed into chaos as the forest revealed its true power. It wasn't just preserving moments of warfare. It was combining them, creating impossible hybrid battles where every war that ever was fought simultaneously. The Lost Battalion wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting against becoming permanent exhibits in a museum of eternal conflict. October 8th never arrived. Instead, time collapsed into a singular moment as rescue forces from the 77th Division breached the fog bank. They found the Lost Battalion's position empty, then full, then empty again. Reality stuttering like a broken film reel. What they discovered defied explanation. Official Rescue Operation Report, October 8, 1918. Position secured at 0700 hours. Survivor count conflicts with physical evidence. Medical teams report treating injuries that vanished during examination. Several rescued soldiers appear to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Head count procedures prove impossible to complete accurately. Major Whittlesey emerged from the fog first, then second, then third, each version of him carrying different wounds, different memories, different truths. The rescue teams found Lieutenant Richardson's journal in 17 places simultaneously, each copy containing accounts of events that diverged and contradicted, yet all bore the same bloodstains on the same pages. Classified Memorandum, U.S. Army Intelligence, 1919. Final Casualty Report raises disturbing questions. 554 men entered position. 197 survivors officially documented. However, processing records show 198 men evacuated. Additional survivor appears in photographs but cannot be identified. All witnesses report different descriptions. Subjects' military records change with each viewing. Dr. Harrison's final medical log revealed the terrible price of survival. Each rescued soldier carried fragments of other timelines, memories of deaths they hadn't died, lives they hadn't lived, wars they hadn't fought. Private Cooper's altered eyes saw through time itself now, witnessing every possible version of their ordeal simultaneously until his mind shattered. The German forces facing them had retreated in panic, their own reports documenting encounters with American soldiers who aged decades in minutes, who spoke of future wars with terrifying accuracy, who disappeared into thin air only to reappear as decomposed corpses that still fought on. Extract from Sergeant Miller's final debriefing, date redacted. The forest didn't just trap us, it collected us. Each man who survived, we're not just ourselves anymore. We're every soldier who ever died here, whoever will die here. The fog, it's still inside us, still watching, still waiting. And sometimes, in mirrors, I see my other faces, the ones I wore in other wars, in other times. They're all still alive in there, still fighting, still dying, forever. Lieutenant Richardson's last journal entry, dated both 1918 and 1965 simultaneously. They listed 197 survivors. I know because I counted them. I counted them over and over. But I also know there were 198. The extra one, it wears my face now, lives my life, and I'm still there, in that timeless fog, in every war that ever was or will be. The Argonne Forest didn't just take us. It became us. And we became it. Forever. The lost battalion was found, but something else was lost in that fog. The simple truth of what it means to be one person, in one time, fighting one war. The Argonne keeps its secrets, but sometimes, on cold October nights, hikers report seeing phantom soldiers moving through the mist, their uniforms spanning centuries, their faces both young and ancient, living and dead, lost and found, all at once. If this tale from the War Maestro's archive has left you questioning the nature of time and identity, know that you're not alone in the fog. Subscribe to delve deeper into history's darkest military mysteries and ring that notification bell. The past has many more secrets to reveal. Share this account with those who understand that some battalions never truly return from war. Leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced time slip away during military service? Perhaps you've stood guard and seen impossible things in the mist. Or maybe you've encountered a fellow soldier who seemed not quite right. Remember, Some military records still show impossible numbers, and somewhere in the Argonne Forest, an extra soldier still wears a familiar face.